Democracy in action or democracy in action? We're looking at referendums and whether they really give the population what they want. Also on today's program, too close to call. Australia faces a hung parliament after the most dramatic election race in years. And in Picture This, Eid celebrations begin as Ramadan draws to an end. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Elite manipulation or civic opportunity? A referendum which asks a single question of voters is often a controversial process. As a democratic tool, many people support the chance to have their say on policy decisions. But most democracies work on the principle of electing people to make decisions on their behalf. And some say the idea of a referendum goes against that. Britain's vote to leave the European Union sent shockwaves across the globe, and the decision went against the majority of expert advice, begging the question of whether voters fully understood what they were voting for. Today's newsmaker is the referendum, as we ask whether they help or hinder democracy.
Since the dawn of democracy, referring a decision to the people has been an important right. It's a yes or no question on a single issue with the power to change laws or even the course of a country. But rarely have plebiscites been so common, so consequential, and so controversial. Supporters of referendums say they legitimize legal changes, involve citizens in state affairs, and keep the powers of Parliament in check. But opponents say they often aggravate instead of settle issues, especially in countries where referendums are not legally binding. More often than not, they also fail to give a clear majority and ultimately undermine democracy. In the past, referendums have helped dissolve colonialism. They're also a way to reshape national identity and change attitudes.
I'm voting for change.
Come on, let's have a new flag.
Last year, New Zealand gave its people a say on their country's flag. And Ireland became the first nation to put the legalization of gay marriage to a popular vote. But one of the most controversial referendums in the last decade was a vote in Crimea on whether to rejoin Russia in 2014. Polls suggest that a majority of ethnically Russian Crimeans are now happier under Russian rule. But much of the Western world says Russian President Vladimir Putin wrongly meddled in Ukraine's affairs and argue the vote was unfair and illegitimate. Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister, once described referendums as a device of dictators and demagogues. And it was a referendum that gave Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party supreme power in 1929, and why today referendums are banned in Germany. Another danger is when voters don't understand the subject in question or the question itself. Critics say voters in Greece failed to understand last year's referendum on the EU bailout because the text on the ballot was too complex. Some warn that referendums will increasingly be used as a political weapon by both the right and the left. Venezuela's opposition want a vote to oust the increasingly unpopular President Nicolás Maduro. And Hungary's government wants a public consensus on EU plans to share migrants across Europe. Scotland may well hold a second referendum too on independence after Britain voted to leave the EU. A chance to correct the result of one referendum with another. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from New York to discuss direct democracy is Frans Stefan Radi. He's the editor of The Diplomat magazine, and in London is journalist and politician Suzanne Evans. Thanks both of you for joining us. Frans Stefan Radi, let me start with you. You say direct democracy is a dead duck, but isn't that effectively saying the people are not capable of making up their own minds for themselves, that democracy doesn't really work. The will of the people needs to be decided by somebody else.
No, that doesn't mean it at all, because what I am in favor of, obviously, is representative democracy with parliament as the sovereign. And listen, I'm not trying to say that referenda in general are a bad thing. I just think that it was a particularly bad example that we recently witnessed in Great Britain, a referendum that was only held for short-term political gains, a referendum that was very ill-prepared. So I'm not against democracy. I just think that in this particular instance, it was the wrong way to go.
It was the wrong way to go, Suzanne Evans, where you are.
Well, how lovely for the Americans to tell us what we're doing wrong. I think it was quite worth remembering that it was President Obama coming over to Britain and told us that we shouldn't be leaving the European Union, that actually for many of us gave us a boost. I think the attitude that we've just heard is typical. It was quite interesting in your report that it was suggested that referendum were the tools of dictators. I can't see that. I think it's not having referenda actually that can be the tool of dictators.
But Sandra was quoting Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, she was quoting Margaret Thatcher, who said it's a tool of demagogues and dictators.
I don't agree with Margaret Thatcher on this. You know, I think we've had a referendum in Britain. More people turned out to vote in our EU referenda than have ever voted on any other issue at any time in British history. I think that shows a wholehearted attitude in Britain for direct democracy. I think we should have far more of it. We are sick to death in this country of people dictating over us, even though we are in a democracy. I think we talked about representative democracy in Parliament. Well, politicians change their minds. They get elected on a certain platform and then change their minds. That's not fair either. I think, yeah, we need more referendums. I've been really encouraged by the political engagement we've seen from our EU referendum. Let's have more of it.
Well, Franz-Stefan Gadi, isn't that a good point, that people, not just in the UK, but across Europe and maybe even beyond, are growing tired of these elected politicians in a representative system who they believe are not making the right decisions on their behalf. They are not properly representing them. That's why they need a more pure form of the ballot. Is that a decent point you would at least concede?
Well, first of all, madam, I'm actually Austrian, and what you did with your party is essentially destroying the European dream for a lot of young people. And I just would like to point out that during this referendum, the young people of Great Britain, the majority of it, voted in favor of remaining in the European Union. And I think that says something about this referendum. And I am, as I said again, I am in favor of democracy. I'm in favor of prudential policies. And this referendum was obviously not a prudential policy for Great Britain. You took the great out of Britain, in my opinion. And I don't think it was a wise decision for many, many reasons. And let me just say something, because this has been repeatedly heard. Or made into an argument by the side favoring an exit of the European Union. The only two institutions within the European Union who can actually pass any laws is the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament, both consisting of elected officials from countries. Yeah. Also, 87% of times,
that's
Britain actually was voted in.
It's wrong.
Okay, let's get Suzanne to
That is
respond.
not wrong. That is a fact. Please look it up.
Okay, Suzanne. Franz, let's get Suzanne a chance.
You know very well that the European Parliament cannot pass legislation. It can only approve or suggest changes to legislation put forward by the commissioners. But let's go back. You talked about the European dream. The European Union is not a European dream. It's a European nightmare. It has absolutely destroyed the lives of many people in southern Europe. We have youth unemployment across the continent, which is incredibly high, over 51% in Greece. Running across the EU, it's England's actually one of the
and I don't want to
that
get totally derailed here into Brexit or no Brexit, because we're talking referendums here. Let me bring up Germany, Suzanne, and I don't want to be accused of sort of resorting to Godwin's law this early on, but Germany is a strong example. The reason they don't do this stuff anymore is because of the experiences of the 1930s, when Hitler became chancellor and
I can
became president
understand
as a
that.
result of referendums. So that's a strong point, isn't it? Because you can sample the emotions of an angry people. And I mean, there's example after example. 3/4 of Southern Californians during the internment of Japanese Americans supported the internment of Japanese Americans. Later on, the US government had apologized for it. They said we were wrong. Because at a particular point in time, based on a certain context, people can believe some very crazy things, right? And they could vote for that.
Yeah. I can understand Germany. Given that history, I can quite understand their antipathy to direct democracy. But look at a country like Switzerland, which has as part of its constitution a referendum every other year. Switzerland is one of the happiest, healthiest, and wealthiest countries on this planet. It's a fundamental principle of Swiss society that the people can have their say. And of course, it's done in a sensible way. It's done, you have to have a certain number of signatures by a petition. And that's how I'd want to do it here in the United Kingdom, so that you would have a petition is put forward. It had to get a certain number of signatures in order to go to a referendum. And there would only be a limited number of referendums. You clearly can't be having them every other week.
Well, France, Switzerland have had 180 in 20 years. The country's not burning to the ground. Is Suzanne onto something here?
Well, but just to slightly correct the previous statement, you only have direct democracy in 2 cantons out of the many cantons in Switzerland. And it is true that they held many referendum over the years. But the fact is that these were very specific and referendum on very specific questions. It was never a referendum as complex as the one that Great Britain recently held, which wide range implications. And I also would like to point out, I don't know whether you can see this on TV, but I'm wearing a T-shirt of Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest American presidents. And I would like to say that during his time in the 1860s, he was someone who actually had to oppose the popular will for some time in order to rid this country of slavery. The majority of people in the South and a high percentage of people in the North were actually
we can see a little bit of the
for
T-shirt.
slavery.
Yeah, France, I just want to come in here. I want to ask you, because you believe that the Brexit vote was an example of a bad referendum, let me give you 2 other examples, 2 other recent examples. The Scotland referendum a couple years ago, so that was 55-45, people voting to stay within the UK. And the Crimea example, where Crimeans, mainly ethnic Russians, voted to join Russia and to be swallowed up by Russia. 97% of them voted to join Russia. So when you look at those 2, are those good or bad referendums, France?
Well, I mean, I don't want to pass judgment on either of the 2 referendum, and I think we can, with a fair assessment, sort of know which of the 2 was, conducted within, acceptable political environment. What I would like to say is that I'm not against referenda when it comes to, as long as referenda are actually open to a debate, to a rational debate, and I think that has not been the case now in the United Kingdom. I think a healthy debate is a very good thing for democracy. I don't think we've seen that now in the United Kingdom. I think one of the reasons being that the tabloid papers in the UK have just presented the public with a whole avalanche of half-truth and distortions about what the European Union is about and the relationship of the United Kingdom with the European Union. And I think that alone makes a referendum in the 21st century a very difficult thing, given also our current media landscape, which is very fragmented. Right. And we see a lot of social echo chambering, where people really, rather than looking to experts and politicians, look to their peers when it comes to formulating their policy, which I think is not a good thing ultimately for a healthy democracy.
Okay, we are running out of time, so just enough time for a final comment from Suzanne. Suzanne, people were misinformed in the build-up to the Brexit vote. That's what his problem is with that vote. They weren't told the truth.
I think his problem actually is that he doesn't like referenda that don't give him the answer he wants, whereas he likes referendum that do give him the answer that he wants. Look, people were told untruths about the EU referendum, yes, but that was coming from the government side. We were told it would be World War III. We were told the British economy would collapse. We were told that our National Health Service would be decimated, that our pensions would be cut. None of it has come.
You'll see about the economic consequences in your country and the rest of the
David Cameron, the Prime Minister, oh, come on. Our economics are doing extremely well.
Right,
thank you very much. As I say, I rest
Suzanne,
my case.
David Cameron said there could be World War III. Fair enough, Suzanne. David Cameron said there could be World War III. However, on the other hand, Boris Johnson and the buses, £350 million per week that will be available for the NHS, and also 75 million Turks imminently invading the British Isles. I mean, there was enough to go around on both sides, right?
We did not say that.
There were
we
UKIP
never
campaigns.
said that. We never said that.
That the EU's border will be with Syria. That 75 million Turks will have the chance to join Britain. Yes?
Yeah, well, they will. Well, they will. If Turkey joins the European Union, of course they will have the opportunity. That's not imminently. We said Turkey could join, but we didn't make those sort of claims, I'm afraid. You're totally misrepresenting the arguments there.
So you're saying you didn't make that claim? Okay.
No, absolutely not. We didn't. We made the very logical claim that if Turkey joins the European Union, then the whole population of Turkey will, in theory, have access to the European Union. That's a statement of fact.
Okay. We're out of time. Thank you, both of you, for joining us, Franz Stefan Gardi and Suzanne Evans.
Thank you.
Great pleasure. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Australia's political future hangs in the balance as the results trickle in from last week's election. And in Picture This, finishing the fast, all the sights and sounds as Eid celebrations begin around the world. After days of counting, Australians are none the wiser about who will form the government and who will lead the nation after last weekend's vote. An election which promised stability could well lead to a hung parliament. How did the parties and the pundits get it so wrong? The Newsmakers' Natalie Poihonen explains.
It was an election marked by its ordinariness.
Yeah, good to see you.
Health, jobs, education and the economy. The incumbent Liberal National Government led by Malcolm Turnbull campaigning against the opposition Labor Party led by Bill Shorten.
The alternative is the chaos, the instability, the uncertainty of a Labor-Greens independent alliance.
With neither party inspiring a lead, it appeared to be left up to the wildlife to predict who would snap up the top job. But days after the election, about 20% of the vote still needs to be counted, and it looks like neither side will get a clear majority.
Rightly or wrongly, Julia has lost the trust of the Australian people.
This isn't Celebrity Big Brother. It is about working out who can lead the nation.
Poll-driven panic has produced a revolving door prime ministership, which can't be good for our country.
This has been a very important, sobering experience today. I'm very humbled by it.
Over the last 6 years, Australia has had 5 prime ministers. So winning an election isn't a guarantee of keeping the top job. Australians elect senators to the upper house and MPs to the House of Representatives. The party with the numbers in the lower house becomes the government, and their leader becomes the Prime Minister. But a PM can be challenged by his party's members. That's how 3 sitting PMs have been deposed in the last 6 years.
There is no doubt that there is a level of disillusionment with politics, with government and with the major parties, our own included. And we note that and we respect it.
And this frustration led to the return of one of the country's most controversial politicians, far-right leader Pauline Hanson, meaning the political waters are crowded once again. Natalie Poihonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to make sense of all of this is Bernard Keane. He's the political editor of the online newspaper Crikey and joins us from Sydney. Thanks a lot for joining us. First of all, why is this taking so long?
The voting process in Australia has a couple of particular characteristics. It's a big country and a lot of Australians vote outside their electorate, so their votes have got to be physically transported from wherever they voted. It might be in a different state to their home electorates where they're going to be counted. Australians also vote, a lot of them vote before polling day. About a fifth of Australians this time around voted before polling day. Those votes have all got to be collated and counted as well. There are also postal votes, there are votes from overseas.
Looking at who is set to do well, as I've been trying to follow this, it seems as if, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the politics of the fringes might be very important here, and people like Pauline Hanson might do very well. Tell me, what's the appeal?
Well, there's two groups who are poised to do very well. One is a South Australian group, Nick Xenophon. His team, they will hold a number of spots in the Senate. They've also claimed a spot in the lower house. They're a very economically interventionist, very, very protectionist group. They're very much focused on more support, more government protection and assistance for Australia's manufacturing sector, which for the last 30 or 40 years has been steadily diminishing. The other group that's done well, as you say, is that of Pauline Hanson. Now, she will be in the Senate. It's quite likely that she'll be joined by at least one colleague, perhaps two colleagues. Pauline Hanson's been around for 20 years in Australian politics. She is well, to be blunt, she's a hard right bigot, very, very anti-immigration. She has serially attacked Asian people in Australia in the past. More recently, she has been vilifying Australia's Muslim communities. She's a combination of the kind of economic populism that the Nick Xenophon group represents. She too is very strongly interventionist, very, very heavily protectionist, but she combines it with this very intense bigotry and racism.
Now, you guys are not strangers to having changed your prime ministers very, very often. Sometimes it's very hard to even keep up. Given that he's not expected to do as well as maybe he expected to do, Malcolm Turnbull, the prime minister, how much trust and faith is there in him as prime minister as things stand?
At the moment, Malcolm Turnbull is very badly wounded. This is a man who came to the prime ministership last September with extraordinary goodwill, and not just goodwill from his own side, but from all Australians. There were even people in the opposition Labor Party who welcomed his ascension to the prime ministership because he was regarded as bringing a new style, a better style of leadership to Australian politics than we'd been used to in recent years. In the months since then, all of that has dissipated. He ran a very poor election campaign. He has disappointed voters. He has not provided the kind of leadership that they were expecting him to. And as a consequence, he's ended up with a very poor election result. It does look like he'll scrape back into government with possibly in a minority government.
Okay, and when all those votes are counted and the results are in, we will probably be calling you up again, Bernard. Thanks ever so much for joining us, Bernard Keane. In today's Picture This, Muslims around the world are marking the end of the holy month of Ramadan and the start of the Eid al-Fitr festival. Let's take a look. Today's newsmaker was the referendum, as we asked whether it helps or hinders democracy. In many parts of the world, people appear isolated from the decisions made on their behalf and from those that make them. And that's created apathy and disillusionments in many modern democracies. But is direct democracy really the answer? Referendums should be a complement to capable government. Otherwise, who bears the responsibility when things go wrong? You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Bernard Keane. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.